Okay, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking your source stack, which is focused entirely on the prophetic book of Micah, and we're going to try and collapse the distance between the late 8th century BC and right now.
Is amazing text.
It is.
Yeah.
This is a deep dive into historical context, literary brilliance, and, well, maybe the most powerful three-point manifesto for true faith ever written.
That's a great way to put it, because the material you've shared with us today, it presents one of the most blistering, uncompromising critiques of corrupt leadership you'll find anywhere in the ancient world.
I mean, it's about social injustice, wealth, power.
All of it. But then the profound blueprint for future hope and universal peace that emerges from that critique is just equally extraordinary.
So our mission statement for this deep dive is clear. We want to give you a shortcut to understanding this potent ancient text. We are exploring a society that was, frankly, collapsing under the weight of its own wealth and wickedness, only to find these incredible eternal promises of restoration delivered through one man who dared to speak truth to power.
And we'll structure this to make it as clear as possible. First, we have to establish the context, who Micah was, where he came from, the whole high-stakes geopolitical reality he was living in.
Right.
Second, we'll dive deep into that scathing critique of the corrupt elite and the inevitable, terrifying judgment that followed. And then finally, we can move to the breathtaking vision of the future king.
And what it all really means, the requirements for real covenant loyalty.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this with the absolute basics, because as you always say, context is king. Before we can appreciate the message, we need to understand the messenger. So,
Okay.
who was this prophet, Micah?
Well, his name, Micah, is actually a shortened form of Micaiah. And that name carries a profound theological weight. It means who is like Yahweh.
So it's a challenge, really.
It's a challenge and an affirmation, all embedded right in his identity. And we should probably note, just for clarity, that he's distinct from the prophet Micaiah, son of Imlah, who served about a century earlier during King Ahab's reign.
A different guy.
A different guy, different time. This Micah is our focus.
And his time period was incredibly long and, well, chaotic. When exactly was he operating?
His ministry spanned roughly 6 decades, running from about 750 BC to 696 BC. That's a huge stretch of time.
Wow.
It encompasses the reigns of Kings Jotham, Ahaz, and of course the famous reforming king Hezekiah,
Yeah.
all in the southern kingdom of Judah.
And this places him squarely in the middle of a golden age of prophecy, doesn't it? He wasn't alone in this.
Not at all. He was a contemporary of some absolute heavyweights. I mean, think of Isaiah, who was ministering right in the capital city, Jerusalem, focusing mostly on the monarchy and foreign policy.
Right.
And at the same time, up in the northern kingdom of Israel, you had Amos and Hosea delivering their own prophecies of destruction and warning.
So if you connect all those dots, you realize this 8th century BC was an era defined by a central, almost toxic paradox.
That's the perfect way to describe it, because on the surface, it looked like a boom time. You had years marked by economic affluence, a flourishing of trade, even some international peace.
Or at least a temporary quiet.
A temporary quiet, exactly. But beneath that thin, gilded veneer, there was this profound, festering spiritual and moral decadence. It afflicted both kingdoms. Wealth was being concentrated, and the rich were just getting richer by crushing the poor.
Which leads us right to Micah's specific viewpoint, because unlike Isaiah, who was an insider, Micah was an outsider. That gave him a very different perspective.
Yes, he wasn't part of the Jerusalem establishment at all. He was from Moresheth-gath, a small rural town about 25 miles southwest of the capital.
And if you look at the map from the source stack, you can see its strategic location.
You can. It's situated near the Philistine city of Gath and only about 6 miles northeast of Lachish.
Lachish being one of the major Judean cities right on that vital international trade route.
Exactly, and this is key. Micah had a ground-level rural view of how Jerusalem's economic boom was actually playing out in the countryside. He wasn't seeing abstract economic growth. He was seeing land theft. He was seeing exploitation.
So he wasn't focused on the nuances of foreign policy like Isaiah might have been. He was focused on how the powerful were treating the powerless.
Precisely. That's why he is so powerfully described as the prophet of the oppressed middle class. His message wasn't abstract theology. It was a focused, searing critique of the tangible sins of the ruling class, right there in the Shephelah, the Judean foothills.
And the standard.
Yeah.
The rule book against which all these sins were being measured.
It's always the same in the prophetic books. The standard is utterly constant. The Mosaic covenant, all judgments, all warnings, all promises of restoration were measured against their fidelity to the law given to Moses. That was Micah's whole job.
And here's where the historical context becomes terrifyingly personal. I mean, Micah wasn't just predicting future calamity, he witnessed it. He saw global empire-level catastrophes unfold right on his doorstep.
He spanned two truly monumental geopolitical disasters, both engineered by the relentless Assyrian Empire. First, he predicted, and then watched the destruction of the northern kingdom, Israel, centered in Samaria, yes, which fell to the Assyrians in 722 BC. And that was a clear, dramatic fulfillment of prophecy. It cemented his authority.
But then the danger moved even closer, right to the gates of Judah.
Yes. He lived through the massive Assyrian invasion of Judah under the notorious king Sennacherib in 701 BC. And the analysis in the sources makes the scale of this invasion just incredibly visceral.
Yeah.
Sennacherib's own royal records, which we have, claim he captured 46 strong cities, walled forts, and took captive over 200,000 Judahites.
That figure, 200,000 captured, is just astounding for the time. How did the trauma of that invasion likely shape the way people received Micah's message?
Well, it grounded the message in undeniable reality. It turned prophecy from an abstract threat into a documented, bloody fact. I mean, think about the specific locations taken. Lachish, the second most important city in Judah, fell brutally.
And Micah's own hometown.
Moresheth-gath, his own hometown, was captured. His prophecies weren't safe, academic exercises delivered from a secure pulpit. They were tied to the imminent destruction of his own community.
To be delivering a message of doom while you can see the siege rams being built outside your window. That must have given his words immense, terrifying, and ultimately undeniable weight. It transforms him from a preacher into a courageous witness. So armed with this context, let's move into the first major section of his message, the judgment, found mostly in Micah chapter 1. The sources describe this opening as Yahweh's sovereign indictment of his people.
And what's fascinating here is how the revelation is framed. It says Micah saw his prophecies, meaning he got them through visions or dreams. And they concerned both Samaria, the capital of the north, and Jerusalem, the capital of the south.
The capitals functioning as stand-ins for the whole nation.
And, more importantly, for the corrupt leaders who were the primary target. They are the symbolic centers of the disease.
And the opening is just this powerful, dramatic spectacle, a divine courtroom scene, what's known in Hebrew as the rib.
Oh, it's utterly seismic. Verses 2 through 4 depict Yahweh leaving his heavenly dwelling place and descending to march on the earth's mountaintops. This isn't a quiet meeting. This is an event of cosmic judgment.
The earth is dissolving.
It is. The text says the mountains crumble beneath him, the valleys split apart, like wax before a fire. This imagery demonstrates the absolute certainty and the overwhelming power of divine intervention. It tells you right away, when God shows up for judgment, nothing stands.
So why is this happening? What is the reason for this earth-shattering judgment?
The reason, stated clearly in verse 5, is Jacob's rebellion and the sins of the nation. And the indictment focuses right on the heart of the power structure. Samaria and Jerusalem are explicitly targeted. Samaria had embraced total paganism, and Jerusalem, well, it had become a center for idolatry itself.
Even with the temple right there.
Even with the temple, they had squandered their status as holy cities and become leaders in wickedness.
Micah immediately forecasts Samaria's complete annihilation. What did he say about its future, and how did that play out?
The prophecy is devastatingly specific. He says Samaria would be made into a heap of ruins in an open field, suitable only for planting vineyards. This isn't just destruction, it's total humiliation.
And the historical sources confirm this was fully realized.
It was, in 722 BC, when Sargon II of Assyria overthrew it. The archaeology confirms that even today, Samaria's foundations lie exposed, just as Micah promised.
He also uses that shocking analogy, comparing the precious metal used for the idols to a prostitute's wages. Let's talk about the gravity of that metaphor.
It's a powerful condemnation of spiritual infidelity. In the Old Testament, idolatry is repeatedly depicted as spiritual adultery. Israel, and Samaria specifically, had prostituted herself to pagan gods like Baal.
So the gold and silver they used was like dirty money.
Ill-gotten gains, harlots hire. Everything they built in defiance of God, even their wealth, would be ruined. It underscores that their entire religious and economic system was built on a lie.
Following this, the prophet pivots to an intense personal lament. He sees this destruction as a spreading infection.
He expresses profound public grief. This isn't just eternal sorrow. He mourns and wails openly, walking around barefoot, without his outer garments, howling like a jackal.
A very public display.
It underscores the severity of the punishment, and he clearly identifies the extent of this moral plague. Samaria's sin was toxic. It was a disease that was incurable, and tragically, it had already infected Judah, spreading to its leadership and eventually to Jerusalem itself.
Now, this leads us to one of the most brilliant literary features of Micah, the geographical wordplay poem.
Yes, in verses 10 through 16. This section is a masterclass in literary artistry. It's designed not just to deliver information, but to make it memorable and visceral. He uses these clever, agonizing wordplays based on local town names to symbolize their impending fate.
It grounds the prophecy in the immediate geography his listeners would know.
Exactly. It's impossible to hear the name of your town without hearing the prediction of its doom.
Let's walk through a couple of examples.
Certainly. Take the town of Akzib. The Hebrew word Akzib means the deceptive spring. Micah warns that the houses would become deceitful, Aksab, because they couldn't fend off the enemy. The place they ran to for safety becomes a source of deception.
A cruel trick built right into the town's name.
Exactly. Or consider Moresheth, which means possessor. Micah warns that God would bring on a Yorish, a conqueror, who would take possession of them.
The identity of the town is flipped on its head.
Completely. And the whole poem begins by recalling David's lament and ends by naming the cave of Adullam, where David hid from Saul.
That's a profoundly gloomy association. It connects the present humiliation to one of the darkest moments in David's life.
It does more than that. The analysis suggests that Micah saw in this the final dissolution of the Davidic monarchy. It was signaling the absolute end of the status quo.
The critique intensifies dramatically as we move into chapters 2 and 3. Micah moves from the destruction to dissecting the moral rot of the elite.
Yes, chapter 2 starts with this severe indictment of the wealthy landowners and government officials.
The description of the wicked schemers who are plotting in bed is so chilling. It highlights the premeditated nature of the sin.
That's the key. This wasn't an accident. They would lie awake, using the quiet time of night to devise their calamity, and as soon as morning dawned, they carried out their plans. Confiscating fields, seizing houses, defrauding others of their inherited land.
And this wasn't just vague immorality. This violated fundamental tenets of the Mosaic covenant.
It broke 3 major commands at once. The 10th, against coveting. The 8th, against stealing. And most profoundly, the command to love one's neighbor. They were ripping away the sacred heritage Yahweh had allotted to these families.
And the punishment God promises is a perfect application of lex talionis. We need to emphasize this reciprocal justice.
Yes, lex talionis, the punishment fits the crime. Because they took land greedily, God promises to devise disaster against them and take their land away. And the ultimate humiliation is that others whom they despised will occupy that land.
This segment really drives home the prophet's unique view of history, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It establishes the moral basis for the whole crisis. The coming collapse was not random. It wasn't just Assyrian imperialism. Micah insisted it was entirely the result of Judah's disobedience to her God.
And the false prophets, the religious establishment who should have been standing up for justice, they were running cover for these guys.
That's where the conflict becomes explosive. When Micah preaches doom, the false prophets recoil. They tell him, don't preach with such impassioned rhetoric. They preached a form of cheap grace, refusing to accept that judgment was consistent with God's character.
But their motivation wasn't spiritual conviction, it was financial self-interest.
Pure self-interest.
Yeah.
And chapter 3, verse 5, reveals the shocking details. These prophets operated on a pay-for-prophecy scheme. They would offer an oracle of peace if you paid them enough, but if you didn't, they were ready to declare war and doom upon you.
They were lying windbags.
Lying windbags who preached only a message of greater affluence and prosperity, the comfortable message that people already had a taste for.
I have to ask, if the entire establishment was this corrupt, how did a lone figure like Micah even manage to deliver this message without being immediately silenced?
That is the critical question, and the source material highlights the stark difference in authority. The false prophets relied on vested interests. Micah, in contrast, stands up and claims an entirely different source of power. In 3.8, he declares, "As for me, I am full of power, with the Spirit of the Lord and with justice and courage."
Spiritual enablement versus mercenary self-interest.
Exactly. This wasn't self-generated emotion. It was divine enablement required to confront the deep systemic sins of the nation. He knew he was doing God's work, which gave him the fortitude to speak.
The condemnation then hits the civil leaders, the judges and rulers, and the imagery he uses is the most horrifying in the book.
It's the unforgettable beastly rulers section. Micah indicts leaders who ought to know what is just, but who instead hate what is good and love what is evil. He accuses them in graphic detail of tearing the flesh, eating the flesh, and crushing the bones of the people.
They treat ordinary citizens like mere animals for their own selfish ends. The analysis says man's wisdom is corrupted by animal instincts.
It's the ultimate degradation of governance. By treating people like livestock for consumption, the rulers themselves become bestial. They indulge their irrational, violent instincts, destroying the very people they were supposed to protect.
And when these beastly rulers finally face their own crisis and cry out for help, what is the divine response?
A perfect reversal. When they finally cry out to God, he will hide his face and will not answer them. Why? Because they had turned a deaf ear to the pleas of the vulnerable, the orphans and widows. It's a bitter taste of their own injustice.
And the sickness, the sources call the polluted headwaters, affects the entire establishment.
It's a perfect metaphor for systemic corruption. If the headwaters are poisoned, the entire river is toxic. Judges take bribes, priests proclaim rulings for profit, and prophets read omens for pay. Every check and balance has failed.
And yet, in the middle of this, they maintained a delusion of false security.
Arrogant complacency is the only way to describe it. Despite their corruption, they claimed a proprietary right to the Lord, assuring themselves, "The Lord is among us. Disaster will not overtake us." They were confusing religious ritual with covenant fidelity.
What's the inevitable sentence for this kind of total systemic corruption?
It's found in 3.12, and it's arguably the darkest verse in the book. Because of them, Zion, the city they thought was invincible, will be plowed up like a field. Jerusalem will become a heap of ruins, and even the Temple Mount will become overgrown with brush.
That is the total annihilation of not just the city, but the most sacred place on earth.
And that prophecy was so definitive that Jeremiah, a century later, actually quoted this very verse to warn the Jerusalemites of his day that the doom of their city was certain if they did not repent.
So we've endured the terrifying judgment. We've been taken down to the absolute nadir in 3.112. Now we hit the dramatic, necessary contrast. Chapter 4 opens with a breathtaking pivot from destruction to a vision of future restoration.
This contrast is vital. It shows that judgment, no matter how severe, is not the final word. Micah jumps ahead to the last days, a prophetic term for a future climactic era where the Lord's Temple Mount, Mount Zion, will be elevated.
A statement of global prominence for the restored Israel.
Exactly. The sources describe that many nations, Gentiles, will stream to Jerusalem to learn the Lord's ways. Israel will finally fulfill its original function as a kingdom of priests.
A massive reversal. Gentiles will actively seek to obey his will.
In stark contrast to the Jews of Micah's time, who were actively disobeying it.
And this restoration brings universal peace, the source of one of the most famous, most quoted prophecies in the entire Bible.
In that future kingdom, the Lord himself will serve as the global judge. And this divine governance removes the need for human warfare. This is where we find the prophecy of converting implements of war into agricultural tools.
Beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks.
Which means they will no longer train for war because it will be rendered obsolete. The ultimate symbol of security is that people will live securely, each sitting under his own grapevine or fig tree without any fear whatsoever.
A tremendous vision. But the ultimate hope rests not in the location, but in the king who will rule there.
This is the critical, world-changing prophecy in chapter 5. Jerusalem is currently humiliated, addressed as a woman in labor, facing captivity in Babylon, a startling prediction for the time.
With Assyria as the main threat.
Exactly. But in stark contrast to this low point, a greater ruler will emerge from the seemingly insignificant village of Bethlehem Ephrathah.
Bethlehem, David's hometown. An incredibly precise geographical detail for a prophecy written 700 years before its fulfillment. But what makes this ruler truly unique?
What's essential here is the dual nature of this king. His birthplace assures his humanity. He will be a man born in David's town, but his origins are described as being in the distant past, or days of immeasurable time, which asserts his deity.
He is the shepherd king.
That's right. He will shepherd the people by Yahweh's strength and sovereign authority, guaranteeing their security and peace. He is responsible for establishing the millennium peace.
When we look at the people this king will rule, the remnant, Micah's doctrine of the remnant is powerful. It's not just a collection of survivors.
No, it's not just a passive residue. Micah's Shireret, the remnant, is described as a world-conquering force. Yahweh has gathered the nations like sheaves on a threshing floor for Israel to thresh in judgment.
And Israel will operate through supernatural power. He uses two great metaphors for their strength.
The first speaks of their effectiveness through dependence on God. They are like dew and rain succeeding entirely by supernatural power, not needing alliances with other nations.
And the second shifts to their dominance.
They will be like a lion among the forest animals, dominant and irresistible. It's a complete reversal of their fortunes.
Before this glory arrives, however, the kingdom must be purified. What's the final cleansing operation God promises?
This is necessary house cleaning. The Lord promises to cleanse Israel of her internal spiritual enemies. He starts by removing empty sources of human security. Horses, chariots, fortresses, things they relied on instead of him.
And he destroys all the vestiges of pagan worship.
Correct. The sorcery, the omen readers, the carved idols, the secret pillars, all of it will be violently removed. God is freeing his people from these corrupting inventions.
And finally, this internal cleansing leads to vengeance on the disobedient nations.
And vengeance here is a legal term. It's the action of a royal suzerain, a sovereign lord against rebels who will not acknowledge his sovereignty. This completes the preparation of the world for the millennial reign.
We shift now to chapter 6, which is perhaps the ethical heart and the most famous chapter in Micah. It begins with that dramatic device, the divine lawsuit, the rib, against the people.
This is a powerful legal structure. The Lord initiates a formal legal case against his people, summoning them to defend themselves. This is a meticulously documented breach of contract.
And the jury in this celestial courtroom.
The mountains, the hills, the foundations of the earth, they are the mute, eternal witnesses, having observed Israel's history from the very beginning.
The prosecution's case is devastatingly powerful because it's a rhetorical question rooted in love. My people, how have I wronged you?
He essentially forces them to admit his impeccable record. He testifies to his flawless faithfulness, recalling the Exodus, the provision of faithful leadership, his miraculous protection. He is saying, I have acted with perfect loyalty. You have no justification for complaint.
The people's response shows how deeply they have misunderstood God. They suggest increasingly extravagant ritual offerings to satisfy him.
This is their failed counteroffer. They ask, with what should I enter the Lord's presence? And they escalate the gifts. Burnt offerings, 1,000 rams, 10,000 streams of olive oil.
Culminating in the horrific suggestion of offering their firstborn child.
Which reveals a profound theological mistake. They thought the solution was ritual quantity, trying to engage God on transactional terms. They were treating God like an angry creditor they could pay off.
And that failure sets the stage for Micah's definitive, timeless answer in chapter 6, verse 8. This is the core of the message. We need to break down each of the three essential requirements.
This is the ethical pinnacle of the law, distilled into 3 points. The first requirement, carry out justice.
Which, in their context, meant what?
It means practicing true, impartial justice, especially in the courts and the marketplace, upholding the rights of the poor, the widow, the orphan. It required moral courage and impartiality, 2 things utterly missing in Jerusalem.
The second is to love faithfulness, or hesed. This is a critical term.
Hesed is relational loyalty, loyal love, covenant fidelity, active compassion shown both to the Lord and to one another. It's a deep act of loyalty rooted in relationship. They didn't just need to have faithfulness, they needed to love it.
And the third essential requirement, to live obediently, or to walk humbly before your God.
This speaks to humility and submission. They were to walk with God consciously under his authority. It contrasts starkly with the arrogant complacency of the rulers. These 3 qualities, justice, loyal love, and humble obedience, are what God requires before any sacrifice.
The rest of the chapter then shows exactly how miserably they failed this 3-part test, linking it directly to marketplace fraud.
They failed completely. Instead of submitting to God's authority, they embraced corrupt practices. The Lord explicitly calls out the dishonest gain, the practice of using a smaller than standard measure and rigged scales.
So the failure to submit to God in heaven manifests as cheating someone out of a few ounces of grain in the market.
It shows the sin was pervasive. It reached every corner of daily life. Ritual worship is meaningless when you reject his lordship in the gritty details of economic life.
And the sentence delivered is the inevitable result.
It's the covenant curses coming home to roost. Because they follow the wicked ways of kings like Omri and Ahab, they would experience a catastrophic reversal. They would eat but not be filled, plant but not harvest. Their efforts would become fruitless.
And the ultimate indignity being the loss of reputation.
They would become objects of horror and scorn, taunted by other nations. The message is simple and devastating. The failure to practice justice leads directly to national ruin and total humiliation.
We arrive at the final chapter, Micah 7, which opens on a scene of total societal collapse, the lowest point of decency, which makes the hope that follows even more profound.
The prophet laments that Judah should have produced spiritual fruit, but it has disappeared. He cries, "Woe is me," because there is no faithful person left to be found.
It's a societal, spiritual famine.
Yes. Everyone waits in ambush to shed blood. They hunt their own brother with a net. Government officials and judges are experts at doing evil. The society is utterly decadent.
And the analogy he uses for the people is chilling.
The most upright, the supposedly best people, are described as being like a thorn bush. They don't just fail to help. They actively entangle and hurt all who come into contact with them.
And the breakdown of trust is total. This is almost more terrifying than the Assyrian army.
Total lack of faith. No one can be trusted. Not a friend, a companion, or even the spouse lying in one's arms. The betrayal extends to the family. A son thinks his father is a fool, a daughter challenges her mother. A man's enemies are the members of his own household.
That level of internal collapse is the absolute lowest point. But right here, the prophet makes a personal, determined decision that serves as the blueprint for the faithful remnant.
In stark contrast to the decay, Micah declares a profoundly courageous commitment in verse 7. "I will keep watching for the Lord. I will wait for the God who delivers me." This is the essential faithful response.
Yeah.
Expectant waiting, patient endurance, and absolute faith.
He accepts the temporary judgment, but maintains absolute confidence in the future.
The faithful remnant accepts God's fury because they admit they have sinned. But they remain confident that God will defend their cause and bring them deliverance. Though they sit in darkness, the Lord will be their light.
And the future vindication will be total and dramatic.
It will be. He promises the walls of Jerusalem will be rebuilt. Then, former enemies Assyria, Egypt, will come trembling from their strongholds to Yahweh. They will lick the dust in total defeat, realizing all their might is inferior to God's power.
Micah concludes with a powerful prayer, the shepherding prayer, and an affirmation of God's unique character.
Micah asks the Lord to shepherd his people once again, requesting the appearance of the promised descendant of David. And the Lord replies by promising to show them miraculous deeds again, as in the days when you departed from the land of Egypt.
A second Exodus miracle.
A future liberation from Gentile domination far greater than the first one.
And the final verses are the ultimate summary of hope, built entirely on God's nature.
This is the definitive statement of God's character. Micah asks, "Who is a God like you, who delights in showing loyal love?" The answer is rooted in his said. He delights in showing steadfast loyalty, and therefore he does not stay angry forever.
And second, his ability to conquer sin, absolutely.
He promises he will conquer their evil deeds and hurl all their sins into the depths of the sea. Micah's absolute confidence is rooted entirely in God's covenant fidelity, his loyalty to the ancient oath made to Jacob and Abraham. We have completed this deep dive into the world and message of Micah. It's a message that moves from systemic injustice to total societal breakdown, culminating in an eternal grounded hope.
If we synthesize this for the learner who wants to be well informed on this, several essential takeaways stand out. First, the prophetic view of history.
Disaster is never random. It is always unequivocally tied to covenant failure and social injustice. History for Micah is moral.
Second, the core nature of true worship, summarized in Micah 6.8.
Outward ritual is completely worthless without the inward commitment to justice, faithfulness, and humble obedience. God demands character before he accepts any sacrifice.
Third, the principle of lex talionis.
The punishment always fits the crime. The injustice they meted out was mirrored perfectly by their judgment. Divine justice is surgically precise.
Fourth, the importance of the remnant's posture.
Hope resides not in human strength or politics, but in the quiet, determined act of watching and waiting for God.
Fifth, the contrast between the human king and the divine king.
The current ruler is struck in shame, but the future ruler, the Messiah, emerges from the insignificant town of Bethlehem, combining total humanity with eternal origins.
And finally, the total cleansing and restoration.
The future kingdom requires external victory and internal purification. God's commitment to his ancient oath guarantees this future, culminating in a liberation so profound it will be a second Exodus.
That brings us to our final provocative thought for you to consider. Micah saw his entire society collapse due to a total failure of trust betrayal at every level, where the best were like a thorn bush. But he ended with a singular personal commitment. I will keep watching for the Lord. I will wait for the God who delivers me. If society today were described as being entangled by thorns, who or what would you choose to place your expectant watchfulness in, and why? That concludes this deep dive.